We are live. So I want to welcome all the people who are on LinkedIn right now listening to me talk. I this is our first in a series. We are talking about topics related to building your own attribution. We know a lot of folks are taking on this journey, and we've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and we'd like to share what we've learned. So first topic is signs that your current marketing analytics aren't quite cutting it. And I'm going to turn it over to Nick to introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Kamala. We have three fantastic agency leaders today with us. So we have Zee Jeremic. He's the CEO of Mass Engines. Mass Engines is a B2B focused technology company building best-in-class revenue engines. So their promise is to deliver a 10% increase in opportunity conversion within 3 months and turn marketing from a into a profit center within 6 months, and then run your revenue operations afterwards. We have Courtney Makara. She's the founder of Mustang Martech. Courtney started her operations career in 2010, worked at Marketo, SurveyMonkey, and has seen both companies grow from a small, scrappy startup into trading on the NASDAQ. So super impressive. Her desire is to make greater impact and become an independent consultant. And now she spends most of her time helping multiple businesses streamline their collective results and tame their wild databases. Love that. And finally, Tish Millsap, who's the founder of Revenate Marketing. Tish has a long, amazing career in revenue and marketing operations. And now she leads a demand generation consultancy and specializing in helping marketing teams deliver revenue generating campaigns. So thanks all three of you. Very excited to dive in today. Our topic, signs that you are ready for attribution or not ready, perhaps. So why don't we kick things off there? As working for someone that has a product that focuses on attribution, I hate turning away customers sometimes, but not everybody is actually ready to embark on the journey of marketing attribution. So why don't we start there? How do you know if you're ready? What are some telltale signs that your systems, people, process, technology are or are not ready for marketing attribution? Who wants to kick us off? Tish?
Sure, I'll kick us off. I think, table stakes are you have to have implemented a marketing automation platform and you have to have connected it with your CRM. So whether you're using Marketo or HubSpot or Eloqua, whether you're using Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce or HubSpot CRM, those two systems really have to be talking to each other. But I'd say the second thing that is really important is you have to have a standard campaigns methodology. So how you guys are executing and just running raw reports on campaigns has to be very similar. So you have to be thinking about, am I looking at just assets? Am I looking at the sources? Or do I look at campaign themes? Or do I look at buyer's journey? Whatever it is that you're doing, you have to be doing it on a consistent basis because that's what's going to feed into your attribution engine. And that does take some time, especially if you're a scrappy startup. You might have been doing campaigns in a lot of different ways to get started, but really solidifying what that process is. And I think the third thing is, Zee, you might want to comment on this too, because I think you have a lot to say about this, is the lead flow from marketing to sales has to be really clear. You want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, happy to, Tish. I think that to realize attribution, ultimately, most companies struggle with disconnects in data, right? And that disconnect in data most frequently is seen in connection between the different teams. So it's an area that I think is really important to look at when you're actually moving towards implementing attribution. But I think to go back to Nick's original question is when are you ready? I think any organization can benefit from it. And the fundamental question is there pressure from executive, from finance, or for marketing leadership to be able to quantify the impact of marketing investments, right? And if that pressure is there, if the need is there, everything else can get done. If the pressure isn't there, or if the need isn't there, then it'll usually end up being, because of the need to actually connect people and systems to be able to realize attribution, it usually ends up being a lot of wasted effort if there's not a strong enough pain, a strong enough need.
And I want to chime in and say that, there's could be a lot of pressure to say, oh, we need attribution because everyone's talking about it and everyone's doing it. And I want to check the box on my resume to say that I've implemented it. And those are kind of the vanity metrics to say, oh, we need to do it. There are so many steps beforehand of getting a common language around your team of what is a campaign, what is a lead, talking about passing leads from marketing to sales. Are things that you definitely need to line up and get going before you say, we're going to kick off this big company-wide project.
Yeah, all great answers. So table stakes, have marketing automation and CRM synced up, have a campaign hierarchy and strategy in place, processes to properly tag campaign members. And then, some compelling alignment event, all really strong answers and signals. We've heard marketing and sales alignment ad nauseum these days, but really attribution is a cross-organization. It requires cross-organization buy-in from finance, from customer success, etc. Any tips and tricks with beating the drum and getting some alignment across and excitement from other departments besides marketing?
I can go ahead and chat about this one. I think the marketing department is always trying to get more budget, whether it's campaign budget, headcount budget. And I'll even kind of piggyback on what Z said about the questions coming from the other teams and departments. I feel like it could be good to get ahead of those questions, and maybe before the questions are even asked of you, to say, hey, look, we have spent this much on trade shows for the last year, or this much on our digital advertising, and this is what we've been able to, count towards revenue or pipeline generation. So I think going and introducing yourself to those other parts of the organization and saying, I'm interested in learning about, how are we tracking our finances and what our team is actually bringing to the table, I think is great. And it's going to really depend on the size of the company. If you're at a 200-person company, it's going to be pretty easy to, find the person that's dealing with the finances. The org chart's probably pretty flat. And it'll really change depending if you get into those medium-sized companies. There might be a dedicated rev ops team.
Right.
You might have to share budget responsibilities.
Yeah, marketing has an uphill battle in general to be, we're still shedding this perception that we draw pretty pictures all day, but now we're turning into a real profit center. One of the things that I've found helpful as well is to piggyback onto some compelling event, as Z mentioned, pressure. So maybe you have your annual conference coming up and you're planning and you're trying to justify spending millions of dollars on this. And so, that could be something you piggyback onto, or maybe you have a new CMO starting that kicks things off. It wants to shake things up. So how has this evolved over the years? Z, we were working together probably, I don't want to date us, but 15 plus years ago, before there was even any attribution solutions. What's changed between then and now?
Well, in some ways a lot, in some ways not much, right? People ultimately, I think, are the slowest to change. I think the best part about it, there's a lot more awareness, and I think that's something that's really kind of and opened up over the last 15 years, even though it's still yet only at the beginning, right? So again, I think Courtney kind of really made a great point around marketing still kind of fighting for more budget. And the reason that it's a fight is because, and it's a struggle, is because there is in most companies and most marketing departments very little connection between input and output. Every marketer, generally speaking, is an extremely driven, creative professional who who is passionate about marketing and wants to make a difference, the biggest challenge is that most marketing KPIs have zero connection or alignment with pipeline or revenue. And therefore, it does end up coming down to a story around the hard work that's being done. And ultimately, when you look at any type of a business or investment that needs to be made within a business, activities don't count for much. It's all about results. And so the question is, what kind of results are you reporting on? And again, when you look at the funnel, most marketers, the lowest they go in the funnel is number of leads. And I think, as we all know, there's leads of all stripes, right? Just because you went to a trade show and scanned 500 people, most of them who were there to get the tchotchke, doesn't necessarily mean those are all qualified leads. So number of leads is really not a good metric to quantify the impact on the organization.
I always like to say that to really be a revenue marketing organization, you have to speak the language of the business. And the language of the business is revenue. And doing attribution really allows marketing to, leave those, what I call in the kitchen metrics, that are important for us. We're really trying to do it. And when they talk broadly across the organization, talk about how we influence revenue. And, this is not a new problem. I always like to bring up this quote from this guy named John Wanamaker. He owned a department store, Wanamaker's, in Philadelphia back at the turn of the century, early 1900s. And the quote is, "Half of the money I spend on marketing is wasted. The trouble is, I don't know which half." And that is true today as it was back then. But attribution is your way of really understanding what's working, what's not. It allows marketing to do more good stuff and less bad stuff. And if you're in a budget constrained situation, this can be a really important situation for you to be able to respond to. So if you're having that pressure, then attribution is your way out of that. But I would also say on the other side of the coin, if, for example, you're at a Series B startup and you're just getting your Series C, and you're going to get this huge amount of investment that they're going to put into marketing because that's really the growth strategy, you really should be thinking about attribution then to make sure you're prepared to be making good decisions about how you're going to spend that new influx of budget.
Well, I also want to chime in back to what I said to the first question about the language about what is attribution for the entire company. And if you are that, Series B, Series C, hopefully it's still small enough that you can reach across the table and say, okay, we're going to start measuring marketing attribution, but it is not a magic wand. No technology is a magic wand because there are going to be some things that are not measurable, awareness and sentiment and tone of your product and your business. I mean, there's word of mouth. Your customers are out there talking about you at user groups and in Slack channels all the time. And we can't just say, we're going to go do this project and start measuring things. And that is going to be, the line that we, build our entire budget on, and we're never going to fluctuate from it. Try to decide, why do we want to do attribution? What are we hoping to get from it? The events team might want more budget to go to bigger trade shows. The advertising team might want more budget to do more ads, and you can't have any sort of, invested interest in it or, ulterior motive. It has to be very subjective and looking at what attribution brings back to the house.
Yeah, well, one of the mistakes I made early in my career is being too attached to the tools I buy in marketing ops. And you stake your whole reputation on this tool versus, it could flop. And so you want to stay objective. So some really great points there. I want to drill into some of them. So we talked about MQLs versus revenue and pipeline. I think that's a fantastic point around, well, not only what's changed is back in the day, only every marketer cared about leads. And we all know that not all leads are created equally. Not all of them could go down the funnel and turn into future customers. So I think your attribution project is probably dead in the water if you don't have the right KPIs set for your marketing team that aligns you across the organization. Would you agree with that? And have you seen a lot of the customers you're working with have revenue and pipeline goals for marketing these days?
I'd say they do not when I start working with them.
Okay.
They do when I have worked with them for some
Goes
time.
back to maturity. Are you
Because
ready?
it's
Question.
hard. It's hard
Yeah.
to do because it's not like, oh, let's just set a goal or let's put the data in place. You have to have the data in place for a certain period of time and capture those baseline metrics. So
Mhm.
understand what, okay, in Q1, we delivered this many MQLs, which influence this many opportunities, which influence this many closed won deals. Once you have that baseline understanding, then you can do a goal for the next quarter or the quarter after that. But most people struggle with just having that attribution piece first. So if you get your attribution tool in place, keep in mind your first goal is to get baseline metrics and a starting place. And then you're going to be setting goals, and then you can start doing forecasting as well, which I believe is the holy grail for a marketing team, to be able to forecast the revenue that they're going to produce from their marketing plan. But to get to that point, you have to go through you have to have a couple of cycles, depending on how long your deal cycle is, to really have data that you can speak to and say, okay, I can forecast off of this because I have data I trust.
Right. Especially in B2B, where a sales cycle could be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, even more.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love the idea of starting at the bottom of the funnel and analyzing some recent wins, seeing how far back you can go, looking at that buyer's journey and trying to figure out, do we have trackability as we move up the funnel? And to Courtney's point, no attribution solution is going to be perfect. There's always going to be, oh, the CEO's, it's his brother and they met on the golf course, and it's not in Salesforce. So it's important to, not die on the sword there. Oh, this email click is totally why we closed this $1 million deal. But yeah, I think starting a line on the KPIs and then moving up is a great strategy.
I have to agree with Courtney too, because and don't, to your point, fall on the sword of this tool or whatever, is that don't forget there's still a lot of other things that are not measurable that are important to be thinking about. And you don't want to become one note as a marketer, that I only look at, form downloads because I can track that, but you're not concerned about, your perception in the marketplace and what your brand identity is. These are still important things. So you want to present yourself as a marketer who is very quantitative, but also respects the core marketing function.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else want to add something around the qualitative side of marketing versus the quantitative side, the creative right brain versus left brain, and how do you reconcile that?
It's very rare to have both in the same person, so you need diversity on your team.
Yeah.
Now, I went to art school and I have fantasies of being a data scientist, but
you're a rare breed.
It's very weird.
Yeah, definitely hard to have both of those in one person, but I think across the team it's really important. And again, if you start building attribution and you start looking at these pipeline numbers or revenue numbers, if you happen to see one channel that's not getting any quote unquote credit, does that mean you're going to completely stop doing that channel? I sure hope not. I mean, let's really look at things subjectively and think that, attribution is really complicated. And I think people say, well, I want to look at first touch, or I want to look at last touch, or I want to look at multi-touch. And there are parts of, the relationship that the salesperson is having with the prospect and those conversations, have they bonded, things that are really immeasurable. So using the tool and understanding that it's just more data. It's just supposed to help you with more data. It's not going to be a magic wand to be like, oh, look, this one channel was responsible for 80% of your revenue. Let's just put all of our budget into one channel because it happened to work for us last quarter. I think it's just more data into your pie.
Yeah. And going full circle to the earlier conversation around building the blocking and tackling and the foundational processes. So besides what's set up in Salesforce and your marketing automation program, as you move up the funnel and the funnel gets darker and darker and more tools, what is Scott Brinker's new report came out? What are there, 13,000 now? what was it, 10,000, 20,000? I lost count. A
Yeah.
lot of those are digital touch points. So, what are some tricks as well that you've done to align with digital teams to get attribution ready? It could be UTMs and setting up the tracking and aligning on naming convention, trackability. Any thoughts around that? Including some of these more exotic channels in your measurable mix.
So there's a lot of metrics that have to do with website activity, and only some of them directly are trackable to adding you into the funnel. And I think this really speaks to what Courtney was saying as well, is that we can't leave those metrics alone, that and pretend that they don't exist, right, and they're not important to feeding the funnel. For example, I have a client that is a no forms. They have the no forms philosophy, which is difficult when you're doing attribution, but what we do is we're really careful to monitor the contact us and the demo request forms and correlate that to website activity and other kinds of downloads that we are tracking. So we have, blind form submits, and we have the ability to see, people who visited pages and looked at articles and things like that. So we have sort of a correlation analysis between that and what's happening in the contact us form and the demo request form. It's very data intensive to be able to do that. But because they have this no forms philosophy, we want to really understand what's working and what's not working. So when that number is going up and down and those forms are tracked in attribution, we have to look at those sort of top of the funnel activity metrics on the website to draw those conclusions.
I'm really interested right now in PLG, the acronym for product-led growth. I mean, there is attribution data right there. Do you have a free trial? Do you have a, either free version of the product or very affordable, maybe a B2C price range? And how sticky is the product? Are people coming in? And how do you say, well, okay, we're going to throw all our marketing budget into just give it all to the product team? You still want to obviously have all the other channels to bring people in, engage people, and then upsell and cross-sell for your existing customers, getting them to either upgrade their, membership or prevent churn. I mean, there's all sorts of attribution in there. So I really do think that having the right language and knowing what is your objective for putting in attribution. I really just stress that I hope it's just not one division in the marketing team that says, I want more budget, so I'm going to go and start doing attribution. It needs to be the entire organization wanting to do
And if the numbers don't line up with what you hope they say, you're going to fail. So you have to go in with
or never mind, I didn't do that project. I wanted attribution, and now, oh no, we're not going to talk about the results.
Oh, he's no longer at the company.
Yeah, exactly.
Blame it on the person that left.
Well, and some people go into attribution with this mind of justifying the marketing budget and protecting the marketing budget and taking credit for opportunities. And that's just a really dangerous place to go into. So I always like to say, every single opportunity that is created at your company is created by a salesperson. What we want to know from attribution is, how did marketing help and how can we help you more? So being really clear that, attribution, to marketing campaigns is not about taking credit for any single opportunity. It's really showing how marketing can help, and maybe you want to fund marketing more because you're seeing how they're helping. But it can be a very political, messy situation if you don't, from the very beginning, have this organization-wide view of what it means to do attribution.
I could not agree more, Tish. I love that. There's plenty of comedic sales. Corporate Bro is a funny sales guy that I've seen now on LinkedIn and YouTube, and they always have these skits about, marketing's trying to take credit for my opportunity, and marketing, trying to take credit for this. And it's sales. Like, we need sales. Absolutely. Like the business would not be around if we didn't have our wonderful sales team, and they have a really hard job. So let's not try and take credit away from them.
Right. it's not ABM, it's ABX, right? We're all inclusive here. We're all on the revenue team. And I've even seen, some of our customers successfully have sales-based motions and campaigns. So they're putting their outreach sequences in campaigns or sales loft sequences. And they're really trying to get the whole cross-functional picture on what's working. How do we accelerate that velocity? So totally agree. If you make it against marketing versus sales, it's gonna fail. And then some great points around attribution is really about directionality. It's not the magic bullet or the magic wand, as Courtney was saying. It's about, how can I generate more pipeline, accelerate my pipeline? But it's not about credit. 3 campaigns closing a big deal is not the only reason the deal closed. There's salaries, there's brand awareness, PR, all those other things. So if you start with that message internally, I feel like you'll be a lot more successful in getting adoption, and treating attribution with a little bit of a grain of salt goes a long way. So yeah, fantastic. Just a quick time check. We're at about 26 minutes. I know we wanted to save some time for Q&A. I think this could be a good stopping point to transition to some of the questions from the audience. Pamela, do you have any questions for the panel?
Erica, do you want to jump in? Sorry, I've been monitoring the.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. We have a couple of questions here. What are some things that can prevent my single touch model from being accurate?
I have a smoking gun for that. Salesforce created leads and contacts. If it's the single touch, especially if it's first touch and you're getting, names and contacts either from list imports, trade shows, or data providers such as like a Zoom Info, and where you can bring in, LinkedIn lead records. You might get hundreds of thousands of records that just have this single first touch. So that would be my thing to be wary of.
I would say if you're going to do single touch, at least please do last touch before opportunity, because first touch is just, especially if you have a long sales cycle. So that would be the other thing that I feel like you're missing. If you do a single touch methodology and you have an average 6 to 9 month sales cycle, you're very likely missing attribution for some very important channels.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think also when you're talking about, if you did do the initial, if the first touch is important, you have to actually look at capturing what the actual original first touch was, not the touch that converted them on your site. And that's actually something that you can do your web team can actually do that in a fairly straightforward manner using cookies or local storage, which are widely available browser technologies that can capture that what initially got them to you, not what got them to engage with you. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, that anonymous tracking is a big deal these days, is not just what created the record. I love it when I have clients who can implement that.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone said. It all comes down to having a time bound as well. So if you're doing a first touch model and the touch happened 3 years ago and you're just now creating an opportunity, that touch isn't as relevant. So with measuring anything, I think having a time bound. So we talked about time bounding your touch to the opportunity is one way of doing it. So what's the converting touch? Or time bounding it, maybe you have a year look back and you're looking at those fields, as he was saying, into your marketing automation or your web tracker. Maybe you have segment, etc.
All right, so Nick, I'll disagree. I think this is like we've all been nodding in agreement. So let me disagree on this point, and let's see where the conversation goes. So the whole idea, again, and this goes back. I would say this exclusively applies to original, right? Like, what was the first touch? And I think for any marketing department, especially if you look at historically, marketing was responsible for brand and awareness, right? So that whole point of original really is supposed to capture awareness. How did this person first become aware of us? And again, all the comments mentioned beforehand, notwithstanding, absolutely, it's not about being perfect. It's about having directional. input. But if we want to have directional input around how did someone engage with us the first time, where did they hear about us, I actually would argue that should not be time bound, even if it was 3 years ago, because that was the, what it was.
Assuming they work at the company still, and it's still relevant to the conversation you're having.
Absolutely.
There's a point where that logic breaks down, but I love, this is getting good now. Now we're having a healthy debate around this.
I think that what people have this misconception about attribution is that you set up one model and you're good to go. Like you can use several models at once, and one model that is absolutely looking at the first, how they became aware of you. Another model that's looking at the last touch before opportunity. These are two different models that you give different information. So definitely would, whatever tool you're looking at, make sure you have the ability to have different kinds of models to answer different kinds of questions.
Could not agree more. I could not agree more. It shouldn't
all
be
right,
one
so
or the other.
we got the agreement. But I think we might also agree that all first touch models or last touch models have some inherent flaws, and until you eventually look at a multi-touch, it will still have flaws, but maybe it tells a more complete story if you're able to figure out how to do multi-touch. Yeah. But you got to start somewhere, and the systems that
you answer the three questions:
single touch models.
The who, what, and when. You should answer: who do you want included in attribution? What are you going to measure? And what is your time period that you're looking at? And you can answer that question differently for every kind of model you have, and create a lot of permutations. But really helping your organization understand that those are the things that you're defining for whatever model they're looking at.
Yeah, and going back to the setup, there's this whole notion of contact roles on an opportunity, not to get too geeky here, but one model may only deal with the contacts that are explicitly linked to the opportunity. And then you need a process to create those. We talked about, when we were just meeting the other day, is what about hiding the creation button for opportunities on the opportunity screen? Maybe you have to actually create it from a contact to enforce that. But then another model might say, we actually want to know how everybody at the account got awareness and contributed to this opportunity. Doesn't work at really large enterprises as well, but there is something to be said about how do we get around our bad data hygiene as well, and try to so anyway, totally not to just agree and nod my head, but I think the multiple attribution models is important, because one model great conversation. Erica.
Yeah. We have a couple more audience questions here. Do you use self-reported attribution?
I think this
is a good one. This is a great one, right? I feel like Chris Walker is more than most folks have really been waving that banner, that because of the inherent flaws and dark spots, right, in most attribution tools and or approaches, is that companies should absolutely implement self-reported attribution. And I think that this is, and it's interesting also because, again, Chris generally tends to focus more on the smaller companies, and so I think that certainly in smaller companies it's a no-brainer. Absolutely, I think it's again, if you're sub 50 million in revenue, maybe even sub 100, it may not be practical to implement attribution because of the complexities that are involved, and self-report attribution could be the only thing you go with. But as you look to grow and scale, I do think there is benefit to attribution. However, I would personally advocate for self-reported attribution, as, again, this is something we've talked about, is that have multiple models. Self-reported attribution can become another feeder into the model, another dimension.
Yeah, agreeing with you that it's more valuable and clear cut when you're selling to SMBs with a short sales cycle. How did you hear about us? I think that question could be tacky if it's on a web form. I'd rather personally ask it on our initial sales call. Record the call, then go through the notes and figure out maybe there's some additional attribution that they verbally said on the call. So you're still getting the benefits of self-reported attribution, but it's not quite as tacky, and people lie on those forums anyway. So there are some pros and cons with it for sure. But
well, again, this is what's interesting. Okay, so let's kind of dive in, because again, so Chris's point to that is that it cannot be a drop down, which is again why it works better in smaller organizational setups.
And then you're hurting your form conversion as well. So there's
that's
issues.
Exactly. So his whole thing should be a open text field. So again, an open text field, you can get anything, which again, as most marketers know, that's a nightmare to analyze, which is again why it works better in smaller organizations where, great, you're going to get a few hundred. You can easily have someone scan through it and divine the pattern. However, again, when you're dealing with thousands, it becomes a lot more difficult to deal with an open text.
Yeah, and try to build a pie chart on a free text field. You get thousands of slices, right? So
it doesn't work.
On our forums on our site, I think we just ask email address, then let the web tracker, the data enrichment handle the rest, and then the self-reported stuff we like to get on from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Especially if it's a podcast or something that is difficult to track.
But even again, I'll keep going back. Nick, I think you brought this up, and I love that, is that all attribution is no attribution is perfect. It's more directional, because, and I'll give you a perfect example of this from our own experience of asking the prospect on a call, how did you hear about us? We got one answer, and they end up becoming a client, and we end up spending years working together. And when we kind of broached the conversation again a few years later, and we got a different answer. And it was actually the latter answer was actually the real answer, especially if you want to get the original. Because what was funny is that when we asked initially, we got the last touch. Oh yeah, I searched in Google and I found you. But a few years later, when we rebroached the conversation, we basically, the reason they searched for us on Google or searched for some of these keywords, they heard about us at a conference. Someone was, singing our praises, which then served as actually that was the original. So even that, again, that kind of verbal can be misleading. So it's not about perfection. It's never going to be perfect, but it's do you want something that's generally going to be good and generally going to be informational that is going to happen, or do you want something that's really not going to happen, which is perfection? It's impossible. There's too many disparate points, including again the human mind, right? Which is
and then
our memory evolves.
Having the process in place to capture some of those more exotic touches. One of our best customers came from a woman who I was interviewing. We made an offer, we couldn't afford her, and she went off and then ended up purchasing Calbermine for attribution. And so I actually created a campaign in Salesforce, internal referrals, interviews, just to be 100% sure that got some credit at least. That was the original source.
I do think this conversation is also important to have with your sales team, because we need them to help us know what they're hearing. They're the ones that get to have those conversations with prospects and customers. And I even remember the very first time I learned about Marketo was on a flight. I was flying to Dreamforce to go learn about all the different marketing attribution. And I had a list of a couple platforms or products to look at. And the person I was sitting next to saw what I was doing. They said, "Are you going to Dreamforce?" And they told me, "Make sure you check out Marketo." And then, here we are 13 years later. And that would never have been on a drop-down list of
right.
speaking to your seatmate on a flight.
Yeah. Fantastic. Erica, any more?
Yeah, we have a couple of more good ones here. What do we do this summer when Chrome cookies are going away?
The veiled threat that never comes.
Yeah, I know. I feel like how many times
and GA3 is totally going away too by the summer. Well, we'll see.
It's interesting to me that that is sort of the metrics that give you that first anonymous touch. They kind of give you those brand awareness kinds of metrics. So those may become more difficult to get. I think it's still too early to tell what's going to happen. But mostly attribution tools rely on a response in a form or a list upload from a trade show. They're very quantifiable that are not affected by cookies.
Or a first party cookie, which are not going away
Or
anytime
first party
soon.
cookie, right?
Yeah. So that's a really important distinction. Is what's really going away is the ability to track people across disparate web domains. When it's a property that you own, that's your web domain, it's just like remembering to log you in on your bank. Do you want to remember me and log in? That's a first party cookie that remembers that. So that functionality isn't going away anytime soon. And so I think the top attribution implementations I've seen use a first party tracker, either Segment or MetaRouter, Calibramind, Snowplow. There's many out there, but those aren't going away anytime soon. So I would just make sure you're not using third party cookies and relying on someone else storing your data. Start building a first party data warehouse or purchase a customer data platform to store your data. That's a trend we're seeing. But yeah, really great question and distinction there.
Well, we are over time. I kind of thought this was an ambitious time frame for the topic, but I want to thank everybody. I know I really enjoyed the conversation. The audience couldn't see me rolling on the ground when we were talking about analyzing text fields. So I just want to thank everyone for being here. In about a month, we will have another session. I think next time we're talking about which tools you need if you want to build your own. So that'll be a good one. Thank you, everyone, and have an excellent day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
panelists. Really
Thank you.
appreciate the time.
Thank you, everyone.